Living my bucolic life, free healthy city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and some spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
Good morning and welcome to a very rainy day. And so we're gonna plow ahead with this skirt, learning a lot, learning what Claire's techniques are, in my mind tweaking it how I would do it differently when I do it next time. But I want to do it her way first so we can really get the gist of what she's doing. So I need to remember to look at my camera. I got a comment that I'm looking off to the side, and that's because there's a little viewer over here that I can see myself, and you just want to look there. But anyway, what I'm going to be working on first today is stabilizing the front lap. And she says that you need to have a strip of something. And she recommends a selvage edge of lining or organza or seam binding or something like that. So I went ahead and cut some selvage edge from my lining fabric that I used. And what I need to do is get this wet and then iron it until it's dry. And she says that that's going to take any shrinkage or stretch or whatever. It's just going to make it nice and tough. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I will be right back. Okay, so I have my little strip of selvage that will become my stay. Wetted it down completely, ironed it dry, and now I'm taking my pattern piece that is going to be the area that we're using this stay for. Now in my pattern, remember, I had it tipped in. Actually, I'm going to untape that. It's going to rip. But I know it's just flat. So I know it's tipped in here, but it's actually straight. We remember that. So I'm marking a mark at the very top of my pattern, smoothing it down, and putting a mark down here at the very bottom. Okay, gently move that aside. And this should line up with the length of this, and it does. Ooh, no it doesn't. It has shrunk a bit. Let me see here. If this is at the very top, actually I'm going to put the selvagey side there. Coming in, coming in. It looks like I am about 3/8 of an inch shorter now than I used to be. So let me just smooth her down again just to make sure that it's not just because it's lumpy. With all of that quilting, interesting. Okay, let me check the other side. If it is the same on both sides, that's okay, because that means I can just adjust my hem length. And it is. Okay, so it's the same on both sides, but it looks like my skirt has shortened itself a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and sew it the way it is, but what I will also do is come down here, pull out this bottom row, and put in a new row where this point is. Okay, just adjusting the whole thing down, because I think it was all of the quilting and everything just took it up ever so slightly. So that's not a big deal. We can fix that. It's funny because in her comment she said a lot of times your fabrics will stretch while you're working on it, and so you end up with something much longer that then when you go to put your stabilizer on, you have to kind of ease it onto it. Because I had read that before, and in the very beginning I did fuse this tape on here, my stay tape. That didn't happen because I didn't want to worry about that. I hadn't thought about it possibly shrinking up, but this is a lot less of an issue in my opinion than having to ease it in, because then I would be afraid if I was easing it in, I might have some extra fullness to deal with over here, and I want to keep this edge as flat as possible. So with that, what I need to do first is baste this tape into place using a long needle and running stitches. And the place that I need to baste it is right along here. So hang on just one second. All right, before I go further, I need to talk to you about some things here. So in the final product, this stay will not be seen, okay? And this piece here, this stay tape I fused on, is going to do the exact same thing as this is. Because what she wants you to do is come in here, put this right here along this seam edge and catch stitch it to the seam line. Trim this at 1/2 inch, like this, okay? And fold it over. And then stitch this down. Let me move that over. Okay, so she wants you to trim this to 1/2 inch after this is catch stitched on, fold it over and hand stitch it down. To me, this is just a lot of extra steps for something that's not going to be visible. And this is one thing I'm realizing with her method. There are a lot of extra things that she does that will have absolutely no final impact on the garment. It may, while you're constructing it, and it may give you the technique that they may have used before, but the final product, whether I use this hand stitched in and everything, or this is going to do the exact same thing, and they will both be invisible. So with that, because I'm just not in the mood this morning, honestly, what I'm going to do is kind of put this aside for a minute and just see if I can just use my fused stay tape already on here. Now before I actually do that, because this stay tape is accurately marking the edge here, I'm going to be pulling out this edge basting line, these stitches here, so that I don't have those in my way. And also these up here that are marking the very top, I'm going to be pulling those out too, because I don't need them anymore because I have all of these seam lines marking it. Okay, so let me pull out these. Like I said, I'm very sorry to Claire, but I am skipping this step for right now just because I already have this. If you have not put a stay of any kind in, sure, go ahead, catch stitch it in, you know, baste it in by hand, then catch stitch it, then fold it. I'm skipping those steps and I am just skipping all the way up to trimming it. Okay, so I'll be right back. All right, so just to point out also, this is the underlap. On this skirt, it is a mock wrap, and the one I'm doing is the bottom one. And because it's the bottom one, it will not have trim down the edge. The top one, the one that's gonna go on top, I will be putting a fringy selvage trim on this one, okay? But this one, no. So what I have is I have trimmed this to just outside my stay tape. My stay tape's 1 centimeter wide, so if I want a 1/2 inch, I just add like 1/8 of an inch to that. And I have it folded in, and I'm actually going to go over and press this really quick just to give it a nice edge before I start stitching it down. All right, so what I need to do now is just baste this down so I can remove my clips. So I'm just going to come in with a long needle and just kind of baste it down in place. And as soon as I'm done with that, I'm going to press it one more time because then I won't have any clips to worry about. And I'm going to then come back and catch stitch the edge so that the edge will for sure always stay nice and flat within the lining, because I don't want it to ever want to curl up like that, because that's going to be giving it a ridge that I don't want. All right, so I have it pressed. It's basted down and pressed, and I just want you to see how nice and flat this underlap edge is. Okay, so what I need to do now is turn it upside down. See all my quilting lines here. And I'm going to actually start this at the bottom, but I need to remember that my bottom edge is actually, because it shrunk up a bit, where I put my stay tape on the bottom, my edge is actually going to be just underneath there. That's about how much I need to add. So I'll be starting down here, and it will be a catch stitch. So basically I'm working this way, but my needle's pointing this way. And they are little stitches that overlap the edge, and I've shown you many times before. And I am using a thread that matches, because it's what you do. Hopefully you can see this. So I have it started down here. I'm going to come up here, just catch a thread or so. And my fabric is so thick, that's fine. Then come down here and catch a thread. Okay, this is actually, I think technically this is called a herringbone stitch, and if it was technically a catch stitch, it would just be up, down, and it wouldn't be crossed. But to me, you can use the words interchangeably. As long as you know what I'm talking about, it will all work out. So it actually goes fairly quickly, because you can take pretty wide stitches. It's just to make sure that these little threads here are holding the edge down, so they're not going to want to curl. So I'm going to go all the way up, and I'll be right back. One other thing I wanted to point out is when you're working on something that it's important that the shape stays the way you want, work on the surface of the same shape. Like, I want this to be flat. I want it to lay perfectly flat up and down the front. So I'm working on a very flat surface, and I'm trying my best to keep the fabric flat as I work on it. Just like this. Now, if I was working on something where I wanted it curved, then I would pick it up and work on it this way, okay? Because I could work, when you're working it, when you're holding it this way, it's going to subtly work a little bit of a curve into it. But because I want it flat, I'm keeping it flat. All right, so I have my skirt upside down here, and you can see the rectangle. This is my under part. You know, this is the underlap. There'll be one on top of it. And what she wants you to do right now is just come in and trim out inside this rectangle, just the fashion fabric side, not the lining part, about a ½ inch inside of this line. And it makes me nervous to think that it's going to be a little bit loose, because these basting stitches here, they're only going through the top lining. They're not going through the bottom. So I think just for my own sanity, before I do that, I'm actually just going to get some of my basting thread, which is like just a plain heavy-duty thread, and probably about a ½ inch outside of this line, just put a row of hand basting with this, just to hold it securely before I start cutting into this and cutting out threads and things behind it. And now I need to remove all of these quilting stitches. This one, this one, this one, and this one. This one is actually right on the edge, so I'm going to leave that one there. And I'm also going to be removing my basting stitches up here that is holding the two together. This is a process. This is definitely a process. I think what I need to do is get a fresh cup of coffee, put on some nice music, listen to the rain, crazy coming down, and just kind of take my time removing all of these stitches that I just put in. And I will be back as soon as I'm done. I want to point another thing. Sometimes when I'm doing different things, different seam rippers do different things, okay? Sometimes these little female beauty shavers are actually really handy for pulling things apart, you know. It's just a matter of finding something that works for you. But I find that sometimes just having just a sharp blade that you can just kind of put a little pressure, rub through, and it pulls apart. You know, with everything, be extremely careful, but just play with things. But I have found that these work really well for some things, and this is one of them. So I got the top loose, and I just sliced down this side, and that way I can work down the front. Anyhow, I'm almost done, and as soon as I get down here, then I will cut straight across there. All right, so it is all cut out. I have this basted just below my stitching marked line here, so I think it'll hold for right now. I'm hoping that these gathers hold their position well. I did tie little knots at the end of my gathering threads at one point, so hopefully they won't come out. So now what I need to do is finish the edge. What I need to do first actually is come in, and I can see through here where the edge is. I'm just going to trim about 1/2 inch wider than that. I'm just going to stop just above where I'm getting into where that rectangle is, because I'm not sure what she wants, but this is a selvage, so I'm going to hang on to that because maybe she'll want me to use it later. And then for the lining, you're supposed to fold it under and place it so it is underneath the edge here. Okay, so I'm having it in maybe about 1/8 of an inch. And I'm just going to kind of pin that in place, roughly. So it's in a position like this, all right? Now, you're not actually supposed to attach it all the way down. She wants you to start attaching it to basically where the fold of your hem is going to be. But for right now, that doesn't matter, because I'm going to go ahead and fold under the entire edge, roughly pin it in place, and press it. And then I'm going to come back and just, you know, baste it on with big long basting stitches the whole width as it is. Then I can move all of my pins and play with it a little bit and remark where my hem lines are going to be. All right, so I just have this basted together, and I need to wait to finish stitch this until after I know exactly where my hem is going to be. If this is my cutting line and this is the fold line, my hem is going to be like this. And she wants me to start at 2 inches above my hemming line, so I think that she means 2 inches above this one. Okay, so I am going to mark 2 inches above my top line here. Not the one that the quilting line came to, I already pulled that one out, but right here. Actually, I don't want to put a pencil mark on this because it is the right side now. Okay, so that's where I'm going to start my felling stitches. So coming back on this side, now I can see where that little pen is. Okay, getting my heat erasable pen because I know that it comes off very easily here. I'm going to go ahead and make a mark maybe about 1/4 inch above that, just to be safe. And that's where I'm going to start my felling stitches. So let me get some thread that matches all of this, and I'll be right back. So this is just basically it. Just nice, peaceful little, I'm putting them maybe 1/4 inch apart. I think that that's fine. They're not going to be under stress. They just need to hold it nice and flat. So basically this stitch, you just come underneath, come up, make a tiny little sideways stitch over, and come back up again. Okay? Don't go all the way through because you don't want it to come through onto the right side, but you can kind of guide it. Okay, so I'm just going to do that all the way up to this point here. Okay, so this is my other side, and this is going to be the front one, the one that's, you know, visible here. And she kind of skips over it in her book, but I am assuming that I am doing the edge on this one also. Now, since this one is going to be on the front, I am going to be using the little fringy selvage edge as a trim on this. So I'm going to get started working the same as on the other one, but when I get to this step, I will show you. So the first thing I'm going to do again is come in here and trim this just outside of my stay tape area, because I'm skipping her selvage stay step. So let me go ahead and do that. Now, we do not cut this out. This is the front piece, so this needs to stay. So I'm not going to do any of this trimming and ripping and everything. That was just for the underneath one. So this is the second side, the on top side, and I have it to the point where I have it turned under and catch stitched, and I have trimmed my lining so it's, you know, the right size to go ahead and turn under. But I want to show you my trim idea. Let me pull you in some. Okay, so when I cut off the selvage, you know, I just cut it fairly thickly. And for this, I came back with my pinking shears and cut it just inside here. So I take off all the thick part, which leaves me with a piece that looks like this, okay? Now, on the jacket itself, I am probably going to have a trim that looks more like this, that has the gimp braid on top of the selvage edge with the fringe poking out. But for the skirt, I'm not going to put this part, but I am going to put the fringe. And that is just because if she wears this skirt with just something else besides that jacket, I think that it'll carry over better without the braid on it. So what I need to do is figure out how far out I want my little selvage edge to poke out. What I'm going to want is for it to have maybe just barely 1/8 of an inch of the fabric part of that selvage showing, and then the trim. I think that's going to be nice. If I push it in there, like up here, it's pushed in more, and I think there's a chance for it to just kind of get lost in the shuffle in there. But I think that if it sticks out just a little bit, it's more obvious that this is intentional. But I think if it's out too far, well, then I'm going to run into structural issues with it. I'm thinking that a good way for me to do this is just basting it on. So that way I can double check, place it exactly where it is, baste it, move down, baste it, move down, okay? And actually I can do that from the right side. So let me go back this side. Now on my selvage, there's two different sides to it. One is just flat. One has a little bit of a ridge to it. So I'm going to put this one because this is the correct side. If I had fabric over here still showing, it would be this side of the fabric, not the underside. So I'm going to call this the correct one. So I'm just going to go ahead, place it under my edge, the side, the placement that I want, and come back and hand baste it on just along that edge. Okie dokie, so I have all of this pinned on here, and just to try it out, I took my scrap, this is my piece that I cut out of my other front, and sewed a little piece on here with the machine just to see how it would look. And I think it's fine. I think it's going to hold it really securely, and that's important to me because when I flip it over this way, I'm going to need this to be on really well because that's what my lining piece is going to be sewing to. So, because my tester piece worked out well, I'm going to go ahead over to my sewing machine, and because I have it basted, I can just run a stitch straight down, and then I'll come back and pull out all of my basting stitches. So now that this is done, I need to fold in my lining, and I'm going to just take it up to where my stitching line is here and pin it. Just like that. all the way up and down here, and then I'm going to press it before I get started stitching it. So now with it pinned, just like the other side, I measured 2 inches above this hem fold line, okay, and put a mark. And so I'm going to be doing my flat filled stitches from that point all the way up, but leaving below it open and just pinned down. So I just wanted you to see what it looks like now. So I have it just little felling stitches holding my lining in. And on the right side, I have this nice little fringe. Right here, I have this nice little fringe peeking out. So yay, that part is done. Now I'm going to get started working on the center back where the zipper is going to go. And this little red thread marking here is where the bottom of my zipper is supposed to be. And because I have my stay tape down here, I am going to be using that. For right now, what I'm going to be doing is actually pulling out this basting thread. I don't really need it anymore because the edge of this tape, the inside edge, is along that same marking line. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this line out on both of my skirt pieces. Alright, so the first thing I need to do is pin my 2 center back seams together. This point here, along this edge between the bottom of my zipper mark and the top, I need to come back in here and hand baste it along that stitching line. Okay, so I have this top part basted. I just read the book. Apparently she wants you to baste the bottom part, not the top part. But you know what? I'm going to leave this here for now because I can use my basting stitches to get a nice press so that these will be pressed correctly. But I need to go back and I'm going to do a separate thread from this point all the way down. The same method, matching it up, you know, piece by piece, all the way down. And once I get it to the very bottom edge, then I'm going to come back and machine stitch it. Alright, see if you can see. I have basting stitches all along here, which is below my zipper placement marking. So now I'm going to go over to my sewing machine, and starting at this point and working down, she does not want you to backstitch. She wants you just to start and get going and then bring the thread through and tie a knot. She says that if you backstitch, it could cause stiffness, and we don't want stiffness, we want softness with this. So I'm going to go ahead with a stitch, you know, a very nice, steady, maybe 2.5 millimeter stitch all the way down. So now I'm pulling out these little red threads. I'm not a fan of thread marking. It takes a long time and they get caught in everything. So I'm just putting that out there. Not a fan of thread marking, but we're doing it. So I'm going to push this thread over to the other side here so I can tie them off together. Alright, so I got my knot right down there at the base, right where it needs to be. I'm going to clip that. So I really hate to say it, I'm going to do it just her way and then not. But this whole thing with putting in a zipper stay, it's basically the same as when I decided to opt out of using her selvage edged stuff before because I had this. Well, because I have this up here in my zipper area, it's the same thing. So I'm going to say I'm not going to do that because my stay tape is here. And at this point, I still have one very large skirt piece. They aren't attached together at the front at all. So I can just kind of drape it over my ironing board. And first, I am pressing lightly. See my basting stitches up here already coming loose, so I had to turn off the camera. It was just getting way too steamy. But do what you can to get a nice press. Use a press cloth if you need to, if your fabric is at all delicate. And I am using my clapper block to get a nice crease. Basically, I'm getting my fabric, especially up here. I'm not pressing down really hard. I'm more hovering over it and then coming over with my clapper, putting that on and pressing down while it's already hot and steamy. Okay, so that now I have a nice sharper crease right here where my zipper opening is going to be. Okay, at this point, I don't see it in her instructions, but I need to trim these seam allowances down. So I am going to be trimming them to a 1-inch seam allowance. And just to make it easy on myself, I am lining up my ruler and I'm drawing a line with my heat erasable pen that I can then come back and just cut along this line, and that will give me a nice seam allowance on both sides and a uniform size up here where my zipper is going to go into. So it's time to start working on putting in the zipper. And fun, the zipper is entirely put in by hand. Now she wants you to use all kinds of threads to mark different things, and I am not. I am using my pen. It's just easier for me, and I will end up with the same final product. I just won't have to spend a lot of time pulling out little threads that I've sewn over. So the first thing I've marked is about 3/8 inch down from the top of the zipper, putting a mark straight across, okay? And that mark is going to line up with this point, this gathered top of my piece. All right, so if you still have your basting stitches in that line the top of your pieces, that's what it lines up with. I'm matching it up with where my gathers are. And I am not going to be able to use my double-sided basting tape that I use for everything, so that's making me sad right now, but we're going to go through it. What I need to do is start by matching this line up here with this line, which is in line here, and putting it so that there's a little bit of the fabric that is visible on the outside of my zipper, okay? What she wants me to do is baste down there. All right, so I have a 7-inch zipper, which is what my original skirt pattern called for. But when I got to pinning it down, because we're doing this kind of a different method than the original skirt, it was a little bit short. It was a tad, maybe 3/4 of an inch actually, that I need to stitch a little bit further. So I just put a little dot on this side. That little black dot is my heat erasable pen. So I'm going to go back to my sewing machine, sew it up a little bit higher so I can get it up to this point. Make sure it matches up exactly on both sides. And then I think that I can come back and do the whole clippy basty zipper placement thing. I'm tired of messing with those clips, so I'm just going to kind of hold it and baste it as I go. And I have another confession to make. Are you ready for it? When I added that extra little inch of stitching down there, I backstitched. I did. I did not at all feel like making 2 little tie-off knots. And to me, the back stitching just felt like it was going to be so much more secure. So I backstitched, you know. Feels like confession time at a AA meeting or something, but hi, my name's Marie and I'm a backstitcher. All right, so my zipper is just basted on, and this is the right side, and you do feel a little bit of texture here. But she says there will be a slight peak where the 2 sides meet, but don't worry, that will disappear when you're wearing it. So I guess that means it's going to pull slightly. So I really hope this works out. Really, really do. This zipper is going to be under a lot of strain. So if it's going to have strain and it's going to want to pull, that could be a disaster. But I'll do her method. If it doesn't work, I can always pull it out and do it my way. So what she wants you to do now, use wax thread to sew the zipper permanently. Start about 1 1/4 inches below the waistline, sew towards the bottom of the zipper, using short running stitches that are barely visible on the right side. If you can't make running stitches short enough, use stab stitches. I prefer running stitches. Really, just running stitches. Okay. It looks like they're running stitches, and they are placed between the basting stitches we did and the coil. So they're running stitches that are right next to where the coil is. So I'm going to open this up again, and I will get my thread that matches it and double it, wax it, make it nice and strong, and start up here. She says 1.5 inches from the top, or 1.25 inches from the top, but my top is way up here, so I'm expecting I'm doing the entire thing all the way down. And instead of my all-purpose thread, I am going to use my extra strong hand quilting thread that's in an off-white color that I think will blend. I just want to make sure this thing is as strong as possible. Alright, one more confession time. I am deviating slightly again, and instead of just a running stitch, I am doing a running back stitch, which is a lot stronger. So basically, you go forward, you come up like a regular running stitch, but instead of going ahead of it and going back down, you come behind it. And I am just taking one, because my weave is so large, I'm going to go behind it, one weave, go down, and then come up in the next spot. Come behind it. So basically I'm back stitching the whole way. A running back stitch would be back stitch, do a couple running ones, a back stitch, a couple running ones. I'm just going to back stitch the whole thing. I just don't feel really confident about just a plain running stitch. So anyhow, that's what I'm doing. I'm hoping it turns out well. And you can see all of my stitches are fairly close up here to the coils, but when I pull it, it will still zip. So there you go. Alright, so now here is my back of the zipper. I have my machine stitches up the sides to hold that. I've got my back stitches in here, but I just realized I must have done something outside of what I'm supposed to do, because I get down here to step 10 and this little zipper tab is supposed to be tucked inside of a pocket. So what I actually need to do is come in here and remove these back stitches from up in this little area just to the point that the little tab is going to fall under. So I kind of put a pin here and I transferred where that pin is to a mark on this side. And I'm going to come back up here and remove these back stitches, but I'm going to try to do it so I keep my thread so that I can go ahead and tie a knot with it and not lose any of the strength down below them. So I pulled this side out down to that line so that on the right side then it's loose enough that my little tab's going to stick in. Okay, that's what I want. So I'm going to do the same over here, pull these out. Okay, so now I have my little pocket opening at the top so that my little zipper tab can fit under it. Now I need to make sure that it's actually going to hold over well enough, because at this point I have my machine stitches holding this tape, but I don't want it to pull out like that. So I need to make actually some more hand stitches over here so that it's going to hold all the sides together. So my little bitty close-up back stitches ended right here. So what I'm going to do is just come out to the other side of the tape. I'm just going to hide my knot inside my seam allowance here. So right here, I'm going to come out. So I'm sewing through all of my layers, but it's set in enough that I can have room. So I'm going to go ahead and just back stitch up. What is this, about 1 inch or so right here. So in her instructions where she says start 1.5 inches lower, that's what she means. She means start 1.5 inches below the top of the zipper here and start doing your really close one. But up here is where the pocket area, she calls her zipper pocket, needs to be. Okay, so out here where I have my machine stitching towards the edge. That's where I'm doing my back stitching. Get this done all the way to the top of my zipper, and then I'll do the same thing over on this side, and this step will be done. So I have the inside bottom of the zipper covered up. I have a small rectangle of lining that I folded the edge under, and I'm just going to take little stitches, some across the top, but down each side and across the bottom, just to hold it on so that it'll help with the whole transition from zipper area to down here. Okay, so I am finally ready to start pulling my lining in and getting it all folded in and finished off. But I got over here and realized that this row of quilting stitches is slightly underneath here. So I need to come back and trim my seam allowance next to my zipper, a little over 1/8 of an inch, which of course kind of chops this, but I'm going to see if I can just get by with it the way that it is there. So I need to trim my lining seam allowances also so that they aren't so big. Okay, so that's a lot better. Now I can press that flat. So my center of my seam is here. I am going to cut, actually I'm going to mark it first so that I don't do this in error, but I am going to cut it so that I am about 5/8 past that center seam. And I'm just going to kind of draw my little lines here where when it's nice and flat so that I can eyeball it really well, and then come back and cut it along that line, and I'll do that for both sides, and then we'll work on tucking it in. Alright, so with my lining trimmed, I just basically folded it under and I'm pinning it along each side of my zipper here, and I will hand stitch that down. Now when I get down to this little place with my rectangle below my zipper, I'll show you the way I'm going to do this, and the way I do this seam from this point down is pretty much how I'm going to do other seams on the jackets and things, but I'm going to put a little mark where I know it's the right length, and that is about 3/8 of an inch below where this little thing starts, is where I'm going to put my mark. Open it up, and I am going to, with my scissors on just one side, slice to that mark. Okay? And leave this part open and that part closed. This part I am placing on top of it, and I'm going to pin over it. So for the rest of the way down, one of these sides is going to be completely open and flat. The other is going to be bent over underneath, and the fold is going to be on top of the seam line underneath it. And I'm going to pin that the rest of the way down like this. And I will be hand stitching down this seam line. Probably little felling stitches all along here and up around here. I'm going to just play with it for a little while, make sure that everything works out well for the front, for the back placement and everything, and I will be right back. So I think I've got everything fitting is on my little stay, my center fronts, my sides, everything is lining up except this one side back here. It looks like I need to put a little more ease stitches in here. I will probably end up doing that by hand or just manipulating it by hand, kind of like this, as I put the waistband on, just to make that fit. But other than that, everything's matching up. You can see I have my center back lines lined up with the very edges of my fabric here. With that, what I need to do right now is come up here to the very top. I should double pin this way now. And I need to baste across this whole top to hold both layers, the underlayer and the overlayer, together at that waistband. All right, so I was stitching it from the outside and realized I had never dealt with this lining thing in here. So I flipped it inside out. I have it basted to like this point over there. And what I did is I just kind of trimmed that extra size, that extra seam allowance area off and just folded it under so that it was in line with that. And I'm going to very carefully pin it so I don't go through all of my layers here. Put my hand underneath here. I think that would be safer. Okay, and so I'm going to go ahead and finish baste stitching all the way to this point, and then I'm going to go down this area right here too. You can still see these are the basting stitches when I cut that whole little section out, and I really hope that she does something to reinforce that, because I feel like it needs more than just these little quilting stitches to hold it upright. So let me flip this back right side out and we'll see what it looks like. Okay, so working again, still on this overlap, what I need to do now is we're going to secure it. Okay, so she says to measure about 10 inches from where your waistline is and go down. I'm just going to stick a pin right there. And what I need to do is baste it about 1/4 inch from my edge all the way down here. Actually, let me take this pin off real quick. It seems like this should have been done way earlier, and I actually skipped to a later section to get to this point. But what she wants me to do is come in here and catch stitch this edge to my lining fabric. Okay, and I have to do this with everything kind of folded up. So if I was to do this again, you can see this is just very rough. I just kind of folded it in there because I was figuring this is going to be buried. Doing this next time, while this is still open flat, run the catch stitches around this to your lining. And I am actually just doing a plain catch stitch. I'm not doing a herringbone version of a catch stitch where I just go straight across and my needle is pointing in the direction I'm sewing. Then I pick up a little bit up here and I have my little plexi underneath so I can just sew through straight. And just working along. This isn't that difficult and it doesn't take that long, but it is something that really needs to be done. And I was very concerned with how in the world she was going to be securing this. And so I'm hoping that there is more than just a catch stitch. I believe I will also be making some hand stitches straight across here to secure the 2 layers together. So that'll be good. Alright, so I've catch stitched it like she says, but I still do not feel very good about this. This is very heavy fabric, and I am just picturing it wanting to do damage here. So I'm going to take this over to my sewing machine, and even though I have it catch stitched up here, that's fine. That'll keep my edge from curling, but I'm going to run a row of stitching straight across here. It's not going to be visible from the outside, but that's going to hold it a whole lot more secure. All right, so I feel like I just fell off the Claire Shaeffer wagon because this is going to, honestly, I'm going to have to do some different things. I was feeling like my whole skirt was being held together by basting stitches, and I know me, I know my daughter, I know how we are, and if it's held together by basting stitches, it's not going to hold together. So while I was at the machine where this was just basted, I went ahead and ran a machine stitch along the top, sewing these layers together. I had to. I wasn't going to be able to hang out any longer without it. And so I have also, well here, let me flip this inside out. You can see it better. All right, so this is the front now. I can take these basting stitches out and you can see I have machine stitched this layer to my lining layer, and I've sewed it all the way up to the top, came down here and came all the way to the side. And I just had to. I just had to. It didn't feel substantial enough. It didn't feel like it was going to be able to stay with just those basting stitches. Because I looked ahead and all she was going to have you do on the other side is just make some little blind hem stitches connecting this layer to that layer. That wasn't going to cut it at all. So I love her dearly, and if you really want to see exactly how Claire Shaeffer does a Claire Shaeffer skirt, I would invite you to buy her book, you know, watch her CD or DVD that comes with it. And I will still do my best to try to finish up this and the jacket according to her methods. But from now on, where I see something that just doesn't feel right, or it feels like she's giving instructions out of order, I'm just going to jump in there and do it my way, because this is driving me nuts. So anyway, with that rant out of the way, I am going to go ahead and on this side stitch that down, and I will do this by hand so it isn't visible on the outside. So I'll stick like a ruler or something under here and put felling stitches here to hold that in place. Then I will flip it right side out and deal with the outside placement. But first thing is this, felling stitches, just to hold that, to keep it from going anywhere. Okay, so I have my skirt pinned down this row here, and I also have pins going straight across. This is just an arbitrary amount, and in her book she said measure 10 inches down, so that's what this is. So I am actually, instead of catch stitching, hand basting, and all of that, what I am going to do is, with my little narrow foot, come in here and in a very hidden place along this trim line, I'm going to stitch straight down. So I go through the other layer, the under layer of the front of the skirt, to hold it right there. All right, so I was just about to sew everything up in the bottom, and I realized I still have basting stitches I need to pull out. This is another thing. So she has some concepts in her book, but she skips a lot and is definitely not a step-by-step guide. And she never once tells you to pull out your basting stitches. You just have to kind of figure out when is the best time to do that. But it's just reiterating to me why I'm not a big fan of thread marking, which may make me gauche in the whole couture community, but it just seems to be adding extra work. Just letting you know. So I'm going ahead and I'm pulling out the center front in the underside, basically all of the markings on the underlap of the front I'm pulling out. And you can see when they're stitching over it, you gotta cut around it. It's kind of a pain. I am leaving the center front mark on the top layer, just up near the waistband, so that when I am placing my waistband, I can have my center front mark for it. But everything from that point down I have pulled out already. But it's this underneath part here that I am removing right now. And so I have this side right here machine stitched down, and I stitched it in the trim area, okay, in that selvage trim area. I have not pressed it yet. So here we have the skirt front, okay. What I need to be able to do is, I had to take all of my pins out that were going straight across because I needed to get in there to remove the basting stitches. Sequence of events, you know, a sequence of events. So I need to go ahead and put them back in right here, lift this up to the point that they will be pinned, and then I'm going to be making a blind hem stitch straight across here, just so that this can't pull up all the way and that the stitches are not going to be visible from the outside. Good morning. So I slept on this last night, and I am going to change the way that I am following her instructions. I after going through all of these steps, what I'm seeing is that she gives ideas, concepts, and things like that. They are not necessarily in order, and you are not necessarily meant to follow them specifically, step by step, or absolutely like this is the only way. She's just giving you a concept. And so I feel like I have the freedom to be able to say, okay, that's a good concept. I see what she's doing here, and I can interpret it this way because this way will work better for me. And that's what I'm going to do, because I want to show you. I was working on the front of this skirt last night, as you know, where the wrap comes together. Okay? Do you see, try to hold this with one line. Okay, right here, there is a very faint line, all right? See if you can see that. What that is where I have underneath, very loosely and invisibly, stitched the bottom layer to the upper layer's lining. It's not even going through the main fabric, just to the lining, and that's part of her instructions, is to make that stitching line. I don't like it. I think that that line's going to show very clearly, and I think it'll be very distracting. So the other thing I really don't like is that rough edge at that cutout up in the belly. And I'm believing, as I'm thinking through it in my mind, that the only reason that she really wanted you to have that stitching going straight across is to protect those rough edges up there, because otherwise that stuff could fray out. Even though we have it catch stitched, it's going to be under, it'll be rubbed, because the outer layer and the inner layer, every time you take a step, those two are going to be rubbing together, okay? So that friction could pull all of that apart. So I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to tip the camera down, show you what I'm going to undo from last night, what I will be doing now, and I think it's going to work a lot better for me. So the first thing I am doing is I am taking out this stitch that I put in that made that line that goes straight across. You know, and that was just in by hand, so it's not that big of a deal. The next thing I'm going to do is take out this seam here, which is the one that I sewed along the edge of my trim to hold that wrap part in place. I'm going to take this out very carefully so I do not rip my lining. So let me get my really good seam ripper. I think I put it away. Do that and I'll be right back. So I have this open now, and I'm actually going to go ahead and open up this front. I had run a row of stitching across here to hold the two layers together, and I'm going to basically reopen the whole front overlap area here. So I have it opened up again, and I'm already feeling a lot better about this. So the first thing I'm going to do is deal with this. She never says how to deal with this, and you get caught in a position where you're doing something else, and it's like, well, shoot, I've got this huge thing. So I just kind of sliced it randomly and stuck it in, you know. But honestly, for something that is supposed to be this high end, this is incredibly sloppy, and I don't like it. So what I'm going to do is make it a nice little tuck all the way down, and I'm going to put a row of running stitches down it to keep it nicely tucked in, so that it's going to be a higher quality product, okay? So I'll be making some nice little stitches to hold this together. But the way I'm going to deal with this over here, I did go back, if you remember, because I was having a breakdown of sorts, and rightly so, and machine stitched it all the way around this rectangle thing here. What I'm going to be doing is coming back with a piece of lining. I'm going to cut about a 2-inch strip, two 2-inch strips, one to bind over this side and one to bind over this side. So there will be no rough edges at all. So first thing, let me do this, cut my stitches, cut my strips, and I'll show you how I'm going to place them on here. So I'm over here at the ironing board, and I just thought I had the camera turned on, but apparently I was not recording. But what I did is I took a 2-inch strip of fabric, sprayed it down with starch, and ironed it. Okay, so I ended up with a piece that has a lot of body to it. Then, using my bias tape maker, I loaded that 2-inch strip through it, and we're just going to reenact this so you get an idea. As it comes out, it's pre-folded, and then you can just iron it, and it gives you a really nice edge. And because it's starched, it's going to hold together. Those edges are going to hold nice and crisply for me. So now I have a piece that I can use to cover those raw edges of that triangle or rectangle. So let's go back to the table. And I can faintly see where my machine stitches are here that outlined it, and that is what I am going towards because I know that is straight and secure. And I am just pinning my tape, you know, leave just a hair at the edge here along that stitching line. All right, so I have it folded to that point. Now I can turn it, keeping this pin in this corner to anchor it for a second. Try to do this on camera at a weird angle is fun. Flip this upright. And you can just pin it down in place. It's not perfect, but it is close enough. Now I'm going to bring it up this way. That's about it. What I'm going to be doing now is coming back and with my machine, I'm going to run stitches along the outside just to hold that really, really secure. Alrighty, so I went ahead and put everything on by machine while I was over there. So this little strip here is sewn on by machine. That's just folded under and hemmed. Okay, this over here I ran all the way around and back, and I kind of like overshot at the edges just because I wanted to make sure that there was a smooth line, that it wasn't a sharp point and then turn, but by kind of overshooting it, I'm hoping that that's going to hold it flatter, okay? But I am much happier with the way it looks like this, okay? And because it's like this, I can feel secure that I don't necessarily have to have a line of stitching coming across here just to protect this from being seen or from being exposed to decomposition. I mean, honestly, that's what it is. So now I'm going to go ahead, realign the outside pieces. You know, you don't need to see all that again. I'm going to be using my little stay here. And actually, I have decided that I am going to use this as a stay. I'm going to use it to measure with, but also I'm going to actually sew it on here because it is a nice twill tape, and I can make sure that it's not going to come apart, because with all of the moving and manipulating and layering and quilting and everything, with those ease stitches that we did way back when, early in this process, they're not exactly the same now as they were then. Okay, so pins keep stabbing me today, so I'm losing patience with them, so I'm just going to kind of base this thing in place. So the first thing I'm going to do is work on my center backs, and I'm making sure that my line is at the edge of my fabric, and I'm just going to put a couple little stitches here just to hold it in place. And I am placing this tape at the line where I need to start sewing my waistband, so it's also going to be a guide for that waistband level. All right, so I have this side stitched on. I need to make sure that the opposite side, if it wraps all the way around and comes this way, that it is at the exact same level above this zipper, so that those two sides are going to match up. So I'm going to zip up my zipper, and I can see, all right, that's where that tape is, so this tape needs to be at the same level over here. Do those match up? Right there. Okay. So now, since those are going to match up there, I'm going to take a couple little stitches just to hold it in place. Because like I said, pins are stabbing me this morning, so we're just going to let them be. Sometimes it's like that. Okay, so now I have these two set, all right? I'm going to work around to the side and place my, here's my mark, this little line with the letter S next to it, that is the side seam. So I'm going to line that up with this point right here. So let me stick a pin straight through, because it's kind of hard to see with all the lining, and line that up right there. Okay, so you can see I now have a little bit more easing to do, but with this tape in place, I can ease it to the tape, is what I'm trying to say. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And then with that, I'll have a long strip for the front, and I'll be able to figure out how to place the front. So let me do the other side, and I'll get back to you. All right, so now I have my side seams marked with my tape, and I just have it stretched across the front here. This is my center front mark. So I'm going to kind of line that up with my center back, right about there. Now this is the one that's on the outside, so it gets laid down first. Okay. This is my underlap, so it's going to get laid down second. See, that's fitting over here. And this is almost fitting here, so I might have a little bit of easing to do there, but I think it's pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead, manually ease in and stitch, you know, basting stitch and everything, this just by hand to this little strip, so that I can feel confident that my waistband is staying where it's supposed to be. So when I say I'm just going to kind of ease it in by hand and everything, basically where the back was a little bit too stretched out, I kind of split the difference and put a pin there and just literally smushed the whole thing down. And wherever it felt most natural for it to sit, that's where it is. And now I am just hand basting it straight up the center of my tape to the skirt, wherever that may be. And I am placing my tape exactly on top of all of those gathering stitches. So my tape is kind of covering all of these gathering stitches up. So it's not like a scientific thing, it's more like a molding, shaping, artistic sculpture kind of thing. So now that my tape is stitched on, which clearly marks the center front, I am pulling the last of this center front thread basting stitch out. I'm done with it in so many ways. What I have is, this is completely open, okay? But I feel really good about this down here. Now there's one other thing I noticed though, which is kind of heartbreaking at this point, is that, do you remember all the effort we went through to tie off these end of the quilting stitches so that everything is picture perfect on the inside too? Well, I realized while I was handling this is that when I had to cut this, the tops of these quilting stitches are just free and they are slowly coming out. So I need to actually re-tackle these. I'm probably just by hand going to make a couple stitches to make sure they go all the way at the top, just to make sure that they don't undo the rest of the way. Because at this point that would be just tragic, you know, after everything that's been put into it. So let me fix the top of these. If I was to do this again, not sure at this point, but if I was, I would, on the side that's going to be the underlap, start the quilting stitches at my rectangle point, you know, and have them secured at the top and go all the way down so that you don't have this going on. Okay, so the way that I am fixing these is I'm just leaving a tail sticking out. Come up here. Put my tail back out, sorry about that. Make a couple little back stitches to anchor it so that feels secure. And then I can just come up, and I am just going to keep, you know, I can clip that tail right now to get it out of here. Make another back stitch here until I catch up to my last stitch that was there before, and then I'm going to overrun it. One, and put 2 back stitches on top of it to hold it in place. Oh my gosh, where did that come from? See, that's another thing with this thread marking. Sometimes pieces get stuck in between the lining, and they're just there. You can't get it out. All right, so by doing it that way, you know, it covers it. So I'm gonna finish this last one right here, and then we will move forward.